Welcome to a Faithful God podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Rotzel, and today on the show, my friend Mandy Miles is joining me to talk about breaking the stronghold of guilt and shame. So grab those earbuds and your favorite beverage and join me for today's show. Well, hey friend, welcome back. I am so excited to have you here. Listen, my guest today, Mandy Miles, is joining me again. She actually was back in episode 83, which I highly recommend you go back and listen to. So listen, let me tell you just a little bit about this. So a while back from this recording, I actually got an Instagram. I woke up in the morning with an Instagram message, and it was one that really just touched me deeply. It was one that I just really was struggling with, and I think there was something going on that weekend. I had something going on, and I couldn't talk with this person on social media, this woman on social media. Couldn't speak to her that weekend, which was breaking my heart because I could tell that she was hurting. And she was telling me, she's Tammy, I'm doing all the things. I'm reading the Bible. I'm, doing the Christian affirmations. I'm doing all the things. And yet I still can't let go of a past mistake that I did, a past where, I still have so much guilt and shame over something I did many years ago. And so she was just really struggling. So I said, you know what? I got on Instagram and I said, listen, I think we need to have a conversation. And so we met later on in the week. And to be honest with you, it was the first time I actually got off a mentoring call with someone, with a woman, where I wasn't really able to offer much of anything. And it was really hard. Now, here's what I want you to hear. This wasn't about me at all. It wasn't about me and me feeling like, oh, I couldn't do something. It's just my heart was just so heavy. And I have not stopped thinking about this woman. And I just felt like, there has to be something more. I'm not sure what to do. So I started praying about it and talking to God and, writing in my prayer journal about it and stuff. And finally one day God says to me, Mandy, hey, Tam, you've got Mandy, right? So my good friend Mandy, I was like, of course, Mandy will know. Let me get in touch with Mandy. So of course, as I call her, or I actually texted her and I said, listen, I've got some, I need some help is what I said to her. And she was actually, anyway, she got back with me and said, absolutely 100%. Let's get on this. Let's do this. So I have been looking so forward to this podcast episode, because the woman on Instagram isn't the only one that deals with this. I get emails every single week, multiple a week, about people who have made mistakes and they just can't let it go. They're living with the guilt and shame of their past. So today, Mandy is going to share several things with us. She's going to talk about the difference between guilt and shame. And let me tell you, my friend, it's powerful. You're not going to want to miss this. She's also going to show us how to walk it out, right? My heart is teaching women how to apply God's word, how to take these things. It's one thing to learn the Bible. It's one thing to learn these things that we need to do, but it's a whole nother story when it comes to applying them. And in order for us to experience a change, a transformation, to break strongholds of guilt and shame, we've got to learn how to apply it. And Mandy's going to show us how to do that. She's also going to give us some, really help us with some unrealistic expectation when it comes to walking through and breaking those strongholds of guilt and shame. So listen, even if you're not struggling with this right now, I highly recommend this episode because I can darn sure tell you there's someone in your life who is. They may not have shared it with you just yet, but if you start talking about it, if you start saying, hey, you know what, I was listening to this podcast the other day, I guarantee you there are going to be people who are going to open up and say, this is exactly what I needed. This is what I needed. So even if you aren't, I think it's going to be really important for you. We're also going to touch on trauma and the physiological, what happens physiologically in our brains with guilt and shame and trauma. So this is going to be an episode you do not want to miss. And friend, I've got you. Whether you're out riding around right now, if you want to sit down and take notes, that's great, no problem. But I've created a freebie for you, and I will give you all the details on how to get that freebie at the end of the show. So stay tuned for that. I took everything, and as I was editing this show, I put everything down on paper, was taking notes myself, and was like, you know what? My listeners need a cheat sheet. And so that's what I'm doing with you, or for you, is I'm putting together a cheat sheet for the things that you can do to walk this out, right? And listen, again, I want to remind you, it's episode 83. You can go to footprintsofinspiration.com/83 and listen to Mandy's other episode. And it's going to be really, really important you get that episode. So if you haven't done so yet, go ahead and hit pause here. Go back, listen to that episode, and then come back here, and we're going to keep walking this out with you. So friends, without any further ado, on with my conversation with Mandy. Well, hey, Mandy, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm good, Tammy. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here again.
I know. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And you know what I meant to do? Forgive me, because I meant to look up what episode you were on before, and I totally forgot to do that. But before we started recording, I actually, in the intro, I did explain to my listeners just how excited I am to have you on the show. I have to be honest with you, Mandy. I think this episode is one that I've been the most excited about, like in anticipation, just because so many people deal with guilt and shame, and just the stronghold it has on us. And so I'm just so honored. I so appreciate you. So for my listeners, Mandy shows up, like I will give her a call and she's like, yep, I'm your girl. I'm your girl. And she has shown up for me over and over and over again over the last few years, and just been so good to me and my community, and also the Grow Your Faith community. You were in one of our lunch and learns, which oh my gosh, the girls still talk about that lunch and learn. It was so good. So if you will, for those who haven't, and by the way, I will put a link to the show notes so you can go back and listen to that episode too, because you're going to want to listen to it. It is really important. And you know what, by the way, have you been on, is this your third time or second time?
This is the second podcast.
Okay. And then the lunch and learn.
The other was the lunch and learn.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So if you will, just give us a quick little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll dig in.
Yeah. So my name is Mandy Miles. I am a life coach for women. My quick brief story is that after, it's funny, good topic, right? After realizing that shame and self-sabotage and all of those things were something that I was struggling with personally, I went on a journey to really figure that out. It led me to counseling, it led me to coaching, it led me to going back and completing my psychology degree. And so this is now my world. So this is why I love this, Tammy. You know, if you call me, I'm jumping in and we're having a conversation because this is what I love. I love now helping other women work through those challenges so that we can just live more fulfilled and lives and be the best versions of ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. You know, and it's so funny, Mandy, because, and I think we talked about this just a little bit in the last show, but you know, for our listeners, you are about to finish up, like wrap everything up, which is so exciting. And as far as education, well, let me rephrase that. We never stop learning, but you're about to finish all of that up. Yes, exactly. This phase of it. And it's been such an honor and such a pleasure to watch over the years, because I know you and I had conversations early on and just trying to find, you know, what is that? You knew you had a purpose, you knew God was calling you to something, but man, just the incredible feeling it is when you discover your passion and start going after it. Not that it's easy, it's hard as all get out, but just to see you step into that has just been amazing. And I thank you for your dedication and willingness to follow God and just do what he's calling you to do, because girl, you are changing lives and it's incredible. So I really appreciate you. So yeah. So just to kind of refresh a little bit, again, I talked about this in the intro, but So I called you a few weeks ago and I said, look, Mandy, I am stumped. So when someone reaches out to me and is, telling me about their struggles, I'll guide them to Bible verses. So, okay, let's focus on this first. And in this particular instance, a lot of times guilt and shame of past sins, things that you've done in the past and having a really hard time forgiving ourselves. And of course, I always go back to the one, what is it? Is it Hebrews 8:12? I think it is, where, not only has God forgiven you, but he's forgotten about it. And okay, we've got to stand on that. And we've got to repeat that, because the devil is he knows our weaknesses. He knows our guilt and shame, and he exploits it. And so, really just encouraging women, okay, come on, we're going to stand on this together. We're going to walk through this together, girl. But as I told you, I had someone, I got on a call with someone and just felt so, not that it was about me, but it just broke my heart, because I saw that the pain ran so deep, and she was trying all the things and it wasn't working. And that's my heart for this is I have so many people that contact me. I'm sure you do too, that so many people that contact me that say, you know what, I'm doing all the things. I'm reading the Bible. I'm praying. I'm going to church. I'm serving in ministry. I'm doing this, doing that, doing that. And so often that stronghold still has us. And so I'd love for you, and I'm just going to let you go with it. You just go and start where you want to go. If it's all right with you, I'll jump in when I have questions, and we'll just go from there, if you will.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I think first and foremost, it's important to distinguish the difference between guilt and shame, because guilt is attached to what the behavior was. So we have something that, like you said, a past sin, something that we've experienced, and we have guilt about that. We can look at it and go, I made a mistake, right? And see it for what it is. Shame is attached to our identity. And so the difference is, and it's ironic, I'm actually working through this in real time with my 7-year-old.
Really?
I am seeing her have a tendency to move towards shame. And I kid you not, yesterday in the car, she said, so she's a talker. She's very expressive. Like, she's just super social. And so we're working on her communication with not interrupting and, things like that.
Sure.
Natural things. So we're talking in the car yesterday, and she asked me a question and I start to speak, and then she interrupts. And she's 7, sure. She's excited, right? Yeah. And so I stop, and she realizes, that she's done that. And her immediate response is, I'm so bad.
Oh.
And so, dagger in the heart, right? And so I'm like, no, that's not it. I have to correct you and explain. But that's shame. So shame is, I am bad.
Wow.
Guilt is, I did a bad thing. So I am trying to talk to her about that and teach her that. But what's funny is we as adults don't know that half the time, right?
Yeah.
And talking about, when introducing, we were kind of talking about my experience and my journey or whatever. I realize now, like, that was what I was doing. I was in shame. I am a failure. I am, And so we're attaching identity to mistake. And that's the difference between the two. Wow. And so the thing about guilt is something that is helpful. We can learn from it.
Right.
We see the mistake for what it is. We understand that it's a behavior that we don't want to repeat again. And we can learn from that. Shame is not helpful at all. We don't, and it's not it is not a motivator for changed behavior.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to recognize, like, are we in guilt or are we in shame? Because they're different experiences.
That is so good.
And the second thing I want to say about that is specifically with shame. So we know that emotions create physiological responses in our bodies. Right? Okay, so when you think about being in shame, you think about that experience and going through that.
Yeah.
Think about what are the physiological feelings that you're having.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe your tightness in your chest, maybe a stomach feeling, it's different for everybody. Maybe you start to sweat. Maybe it's, your heart beats faster.
Yeah.
When you're when you're really in that feeling.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting is that those responses that we feel physically
Mm-hmm.
are basically the same as like fight or flight survival responses.
Interesting.
You're having a physiological reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have to recognize this, because we know that it's like a stress response, and we know that stress in small doses can be helpful, right?
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
it alerts us to danger, or it activates our immune system. It can be helpful, but we also know that prolonged stress
Mm-hmm.
is detrimental to our health.
Right.
So we have bodily responses that occur in this state. So when you're staying in that shame spiral, in that emotional state, it's like staying in a prolonged stress response.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, again, I mention these things because these are just things to be aware of. It's not, it's more complex than I just feel guilty about a thing.
Yes. Yeah.
There are far reaching ramifications that come with,
Yeah.
this experience. And it's important to recognize those, because we've got to understand how important it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
To really, explore
Sure.
and get a hold on it.
That's so interesting. Like all these things are coming at me right now, like that I'm thinking about. I was just in, a friend of mine and I don't even know if I've told you this, Mandy, forgive me if I haven't, but I'm starting a nonprofit organization with a friend. Yeah, we're actually for human trafficking survivors. But in the process, so she and I were just recently went to trauma training, and she's being certified. I wish I was being certified. I can't right now because the day that they have it is on Mondays when I work at the dental office. So, and for those who don't know, who didn't hear the other podcast episode with Mandy in it, she and I used to work together at the dental office. So, but anyway, so we went through this trauma training, and there was so much information, and it was so eye-opening to see what trauma and prolonged stress actually does to your brain.
Yes.
And how it creates those new neuro pathways because your body's trying to help you, like break, here, let me protect, let me protect.
Right.
But in the process, a lot of times then we don't deal with it. And then later on, it comes back up.
So damage the cells in the hypothalamus. It can affect your memory.
Yes.
Yeah. So it does. And saying that, Tammy, the trauma, that is those physiological shame responses are basically trauma responses. I mean, it's almost the same thing.
Is that right? Yeah.
So and you think, again, if you just, and everybody's different. So if you just think about what you physically feel.
Yeah.
And this is something I suggest, even if it's not shame, just with emotional processing, is like paying attention to what your body is feeling, right?
Yes.
Because there are clues that alert us to things, right? So, but what happens, so with that, talking about that and the brain and how things change, our brains want to protect us, right? So we're feeling the shame, we're having these physiological responses. Our brain wants to protect us from that. And so what happens is to do that, to kind of pull us out of that survival mode, if you will, we come up with a story.
Yes.
So we create a story around what it is that is creating the shame. And the story gives us not an out, but it's almost an
excuse?
justification.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So, let's say something has happened in the past and maybe it's just an event has happened in the past
Mm-hmm.
and it created this response, right? Your stress response, your trauma response. And so now we've created a story around that event.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when we tell that story, it allows us to explain how we feel. It allows us to justify how we feel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like a protection
Yeah.
mechanism.
Yeah.
So when we have that shame that is attached to that, we go to that story. We go to that default story,
Mm-hmm.
right? We start feeling that, and we know what the story is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And because we know that thoughts are attached to emotions, attached to actions, we know it's like a cycle. And
Right.
so then it's a reinforcement, right? So it's like we have those feelings and then it just reinforces the story that we're telling, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Like I'm just like, my
Yeah.
brain is just, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, like we're taking, and of course, every situation is different, right? It
Yeah.
could be a time period, it could be a season of life, it could be one event.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that
Yeah,
it could be one event. Yeah.
be one event, but we take it. It happened one time,
Mm-hmm.
but we tell the story over and over and over and over again. And I don't necessarily mean we're telling people.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're telling the story here. We're telling it
Right.
to ourselves. We're punishing ourselves for one event
Mm-hmm.
over and over and over again. And every time we do, it's that it's we're having the physiological reactions, we're having the guilt, we're having the shame, like all of it's coming with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, going back to what you started saying, I do think it's harder. It's like we know God forgives us,
Yeah.
we know that we can give it to Him, but it's so difficult to actually take that and be like, okay,
Okay. I'm fine.
give it over. I'm done. I'm done.
Yeah.
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 Um, yeah, it's just it's terribly difficult to
Yeah.
do that. And so I do think that having some sort of practical, way to work through,
Yeah.
um, ultimately we know it's not ours, but when we feel like we're not making progress,
Mm-hmm.
I think that works against us as well.
Yeah.
Um, I do think that time plays a big part in it.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on when this event happened, like, I think time does play a role in that.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the things that I like to do or think about or recommend is taking that story
Mm-hmm.
and really dissecting it, really, really looking at the story. What is the story I'm telling about this situation?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's like, can I challenge this narrative?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing would be, is there any goodness that I could pull from this? Is
Mm-hmm.
there anything in it depends, of course, on what it is,
Yeah.
what that event is. I can't speak to that. It has, it's all individual, but
Mm-hmm.
is there anything that I can pull from this?
Mm-hmm.
And even, can I look at this with guilt instead of shame? Like, can I make this story one? Can I figure out a way to sort of rewrite this a little bit so that I am making this about the behavior or the event or the circumstance and not about my identity?
Oh, okay. You just boom right there.
Yeah.
Okay, if I can stop you for just a quick moment. A little bit ago, you said that this is the same response to, or very similar to the response you receive when there's been trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone listening right now that is, maybe not dealing with guilt and shame, this is so important for them to walk through these steps as well, because the response is so similar that all of a sudden, you think you've put it behind you, whether it's trauma, guilt, or shame. You think you've put it behind you, and then something happens and it triggers you, and you go spiraling out of control. Your thoughts go right back to the incident as if no time had passed. So what I'm hearing from you is that we can do this, whether it's trauma or it's guilt and shame, and how to break those strongholds that either trauma or guilt and shame have on us. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And I would refer back to that previous episode.
Yes, for sure.
Where I walk through this process of processing the emotions.
Yes.
Because and that's the thing too, like there may be other emotions in there that haven't been processed within that story. Like, yes, I feel guilty or I feel shame or whatever, but is there grief in there that I haven't gotten through? Is there sadness? Is there, you know what I mean? So identifying the story and really looking, okay, this is a story I'm telling about this situation, about the thing that I'm feeling this shame around, right? Then processing through that. And again, that goes into those questions of asking, what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, how I'm responding, what are those physiological responses, really like dissecting what that is. And then we move into challenging the narrative, right? Is there a different way I can look at this? And this part is specifically with shame and guilt, is where I would really try to, how can I reframe the story to guilt instead of shame, to behavior instead of identity, right? So, and the reason why I want to create that detachment is because, as I said in the beginning, we can learn from guilt. We can learn from, we can alter behavior, because the thing about it is, we have an event that happens that's so impactful in that way. It changes us. Right. So when it changes us, if we can look at it with a guilt perspective, a behavior perspective, and we can detach the identity, then what happens is we can look back at that and we can look at the person that experienced or did the behavior you're ashamed of, whatever. We can look at that version of us as a different version of us. And that little bit of detachment, looking at going, okay, but I'm not that person anymore. This has changed me. Even if it's saying, I know I would never do that again, whatever the case may be, but this is hard. Can we look at that version of ourselves with grace and love and compassion? And can we acknowledge that even though you're not that version anymore, even though you wouldn't do that behavior anymore, she's still the person that got you to the point that you're at today. That's good. Can we just give her compassion? Can we, care for that version of ourselves in a way that has grace? But I think that little bit of detachment has to happen. We have to separate that, and we have to understand that growth occurs when we see it as the behavior and not as the identity.
Oh, boom. Say that again. That was a good one.
Growth occurs. The growth occurs when we see that past mistake, that past event, as the behavior and not the identity.
That is so good. Okay. So I'm all about in our community, and definitely I'm going to put the links to the last show notes because that is going to be so key. That is going to be so important. But I'm all about teaching women. There are two questions that I have, and I want to break these down if that's okay. I want the first question is, okay, how do we, I know you're telling us how to walk it out, but what does that look like? And, all of a sudden, this shame comes over us. We go right back to it. And yes, I understand that we take those steps from the last episode and we apply them. But when you're stuck in the middle, what are some things that you can tell us? Like for some people, just journaling, perhaps. I know this particular woman that I spoke to, she tried the journaling and it just wasn't for her. So what kind of practical applications when we are stuck in it, right? We talk about prepping our environment. I think we did with you in that lunch and learn as well, talking about prepping our environment, right? We need to know what to do ahead of time because when it happens, not if, but when it happens, we'll be able to say, oh, wait a minute. It may not be immediately yet as we build those spiritual reflexes, but what are we going to do in those moments? So what would be your answer to that? And then remind me, because I have another question, then I'll follow up.
So my first thing is journal as well. And there is research behind the process of writing it out, writing these things out. So for me, that's what I'm doing. Let me back up a second. First of all, learning to notice it, learning to awareness.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, I'm feeling this. You know what I mean? So that's key for one.
Yeah.
Like, all right, hold on. I'm having a moment. This is hitting me. So then, as soon as you can, my go-to is I'm grabbing a pen and a paper and I'm writing, everything, every feeling, every physical response, every thought. The biggest thing is what is in my mind right now, write everything. No filters, no, trying to figure it out, just pour it out. I have clients too that are not journal people. Grab your phone, go into your closet, and take a voice memo.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Or, we have technology now. If you don't want to write it, we can record and transcribe it somewhere.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
I personally love seeing the words. I feel like there is an action to doing that, and it feels productive for me. And I feel like that's again, there's research behind it. There's a lot of things that I really believe in that. So, but if that's not for you, or if you can't do that in the moment, like put a note on your phone or grab your voice. My voice memos stay full. I will take a moment alone and go and just pour it out. Right.
Yeah.
Like make your voice memo. Right.
Yeah.
Get it out as quickly as you can, as soon as you can. Right. Then we have to go into the reflection. Then we have to, and maybe that is where you can go back and go, okay, maybe I'm sitting back down. I've got that out. I take I take some time. Sometimes you can do that in the same moment, right? We can let it all out and then we can take a breath and then we can start a process. Sometimes you need a break in between.
Right.
But then all those thoughts, all those feelings, all those things that you're pouring out, like put that together because that's your story. And so from that is where we start breaking it down. Right. And it's with this topic in particular, I think it's asking those questions. Am I in guilt or am I in shame right here? Am I looking at my identity? Am I looking at the behavior? Right. And then trying to just again, dissect it. Okay. I'm in shame right now, but what is the actual behavior? Let's look at the behavior. Let's break it down. Right.
Yeah.
And that's, just walking through it in a very kind of tactical way.
I love that word. Yeah.
Deconstructing, really deconstructing the story. And as you do that, you can kind of piece together what the overarching message is, right? That you tend to keep going back to, right?
Yeah.
And then, again, it's that back and forth process. All right, let's look at behavior. can I separate this from who I am? There's a lot of questions involved in like that, because we'll have thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
and are these thoughts true?
Yeah.
And I talk about this, in the last episode, but
Mm-hmm.
even if the thoughts are true, the
Mm-hmm.
follow-up to that is always, is this thought serving me?
Yes. Yes.
So we know that if we are telling a story that is keeping us in shame, it's not serving us.
Yes.
And so how can we rewrite the story? How can we separate the behavior and the identity,
Mm-hmm.
um, in a way that allows us to move forward?
Yeah.
It allows us to have that grace and compassion for our previous self,
Yeah.
the one that learned from that situation,
Yeah.
and move forward with it.
Yeah.
Let it be done.
Yes.
Let it be done.
Yes.
And it might take processing several times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't mean that has to be a one and done experience. It might take, but I think if you get into the practice,
Mm-hmm.
then as the awareness grows, and each time that grows and you're getting into the practice,
Mm-hmm.
each time you're going to be taking a step forward.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that, because that was what the next thing I wrote on here is, what can we expect? And that's what's so important to understand. Something I say in my community all the time is we have to be persistent and consistent.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to experience a transformation, if we want to let go of that shame, that constantly going back to that, because it becomes paralyzing, it's suffocating. Mm-hmm. But if we want to do that, there are steps that we have to take. And so that's why I love that you're, that, and between this episode and the last episode, walking through those steps. And yes, you're going to have to do it again and again. And that's what, one of the phrases that, that Christianese phrase of letting go and letting God, it's not my favorite phrase, because right. It sets people up for failure every single time. They think that once they let it go, they should be able to, move on and never experience it again. And then when they do, they feel like they're a failure. And that's not the case at all. This takes practice and persistence. And it just, you have to keep going back to that, and knowing and allowing yourself the grace to go back to that. But the thing is, so physiologically, it can change, right? You can change. You can let that go. You can create new neural pathways where your brain isn't immediately going to that during those triggers, correct?
Right. Because the and it comes back to that attachment between your thought and your emotion, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And this is why rewriting the story is important. Yes. And to your point, you don't just, you can't just, okay, here's my new story, I'm done, right?
Yes.
Practice and practice. Look, you've been telling this story for a long time, in some cases, right?
Yeah.
Like, we might have a story about an event that happened 20 years ago that we have been telling for 20 years. Yeah. So we're not going to sit down one time and write it and decide that's it. We have to keep telling the new story.
Yeah.
And that's where the awareness comes in, of going, like I said, I'm feeling this, I'm noticing, I'm going back to that place. And there is where we're practicing the new story. Now we're processing it again, reminding ourselves of that new story, and what we've created around that. And I would try to make a specific, I say story, but thought. Like, it can be a very simple thought, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. If you have this mistake that's holding on to you, and in the constant thought is like, I'm a terrible person, or mm-hmm. The new one, like, mm-hmm. create something that is, first of all, it has to be authentic. It can't be a forced thing, right?
Okay.
And then something that is going to be like a go-to, like a consistent go-to, right? So how are we going to combat that story? Like, what's the new thought I have when I start to feel this? What am I now going to think? What's the thought I'm going to choose? Right.
Oh, can I
So,
ask you a quick question? I'm so
yeah,
sorry. I didn't mean to
no, go
interrupt,
ahead.
but quick question. So you said it can't be forced, even if in the beginning, like, what do you mean by that? Can you drill down a little bit more? Because I'm thinking like in the
Well,
beginning, you may not believe it. Am I
true.
thinking
Yes.
incorrectly?
No, no, no,
Okay.
you're correct.
Okay.
I
Okay.
think it has to be, I think you have to have some level of, it's hard to
Awareness.
explain,
Okay.
awareness and
Okay.
some connection to it. And in
Okay.
terms of like,
Okay.
if you're writing something down, like, okay, here's my news story, and your response to that is like, like,
Okay.
okay, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, you
Yeah.
have
That
to
makes
have,
total
so
sense
you
now.
might have to
Okay.
kind of like work through that.
Okay.
And the only way I can say is like, write some things down, come up with some
Yeah.
new thoughts to counteract that old
Yeah.
story. Something's going to resonate with you.
Yeah.
So it's you're going to and part of it could be, one of the ways I do this, again, in that full explanation before, is sometimes we have a hard time coming up with the story. So what is the feeling you want to feel? What are you wanting
Yes.
to feel? I feel shame. I feel this. I feel right. What do you want to feel?
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So sometimes we have to identify the feeling first.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that feeling, then write down 3, 4, 5 thoughts and stories. And then as you read them back, which one of those evokes that feeling the most
Okay.
in you?
Okay.
Even if you're not like all in and sold on it yet,
Yeah.
when you
Okay.
read that, which one of those creates the feeling you're after the most?
Okay. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes total sense. Thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt you,
Oh,
but
no,
that,
no, no.
okay.
Glad you,
Yeah. That
because that's going
makes,
to clarify. Yeah.
okay. That makes total sense. Yeah, for sure. For
Was
sure.
that your second question?
Well, honestly, you answered my
Oh.
second question and all of it, because I would like what something I like for my listeners to know, and I like to share with my community is what they can expect, because we tell these are the things we want, but here's the thing: we're walking it out, and it's not going to be walked out perfectly. We're not going to be successful every single time. But again, we have to be persistent and consistent. If
Right.
that's what we want to see, we have to keep practicing this. And another thing that I love about this is, it reminds me, one of my I have a lot of favorite passages in the Bible, but one of my absolute favorites is Second Chronicles chapter 20, where King Jehoshaphat, this big army is coming towards him, and he's saying, oh my goodness, like, this is impossible. There's no way we can fight this army. And I think we feel that so much with our strongholds. It's like, how do we break these? It's impossible. And, what God tells them to do is look, you just have to stand up, meaning you have to stand up, like, do the work. Okay, here we go.
Right.
You've got to stand up. You've got to be able to stand up, not just sit there on the sidelines and let God come in and do everything. There's work we have to do. But when we do that, when we show up and when we praise God and when we shout the victory and claim the victory before we see, what we're praying for, that's when God comes in and just like blows everything out of the water. That's when we get to experience a really big change. And I see that in you explaining that what we have to do then is, okay, this is what I'm feeling now. What do I want to feel? And then we're going to declare that victory. We're going to take that and we're going to stand on that. And it doesn't mean that we stand on it one time and we're necessarily going to feel great, but it means we're going to stand on that over and over and
Yeah.
over again. And so, yeah, that was my second question, is just, being able for my listeners to understand, because I think we all have these unrealistic expectations surrounding everything in our life.
Right.
And
Yep.
we've got to understand what's reality. And, we do this in everything, right? In our prayer life, we do it in our faith walk, we do it in our business. I mean, like you and me, Mandy, we look at some of these, big name people in our industry and we go, oh my gosh, they have everything right. And everything's great. And then all of a sudden you get to know them more and you go, oh, they started out just like me,
right.
or they still go through the same struggles that I'm going through right now. So I think it's just important for them to understand that this is normal. This is not easy. This is not, it is hard work. But when we bring God into the equation and stand on what we know to be true, that, we can break these strongholds. Is it easy? No, but we can do it. And especially when we bring God into it. So, yeah.
And I think the recognition that, if you've got someone, even like you said, when you called me the other week, someone even reaching out to you and saying, because the reality is, most people are living in this place and living in this way without the awareness of it. Like, I cannot express how massive of an accomplishment it is to have awareness of these things and then go, I need to make a change. I can't stay in this place. This is not healthy for me. Right.
Yeah.
Because the other thing about shame is it is massively correlated with addiction and suicide and all of these things. Like, those things don't exist without shame.
Yes.
So the path that can occur by not being aware, by not doing the work and trying to grow and move forward and release this is, horribly detrimental to many people when it's ignored and when it's not recognized. So, anyone that's just having the awareness, that's a big part of it.
I'm so glad you said that, Mandy, because you do, and I know you do too. We get these emails, we get these DMs of men and women who are just struggling, and I have so much guilt and so much shame. And so I'm so glad you said that, because I think we get so bogged down by it. Of course we do. It's suffocating. But that awareness is huge. And I think it's important to celebrate that. In the Grow Your Faith community, there are so many times that the women will send me a message, or will be in one of our group sessions, and they'll say, yeah, but I didn't do this well, this well, or this well. And I'm like, whoa. We need to back up for just a moment. Did you just hear what you said? We need to celebrate that, like that awareness, that what is it that I'm trying to say? The ability to identify what you're experiencing. That's a huge step in itself. So let's take a moment to celebrate that. And then we'll go ahead and work on how we're going to break these strongholds. We're going to work on how we're going to do these things. So, So Mandy, I just want to kind of repeat, and you tell me, fill in the gaps where I need it. But you said, of course, we want to go back to the previous episode. I'll put that in the show notes, make sure everybody has that. But what we need to do as we're walking through this is, number one, identify and celebrate that identification. So we need to identify. Then we need to brain dump, no editing, no sugarcoating, just brain dump everything, whether it's in a journal. And I'm the same way. I like to journal too. It's just my favorite way to do it. And I love to go back to it, or there are so many free apps out there on your phone that you can do text to talk, whatever. Talk to text, whatever. Yes, that. And brain dump it that way. Just get it out, because gosh, number one, let's talk about it from a Christian standpoint. When we keep all that in, we're allowing the darkness to take over, but we want to bring that into the light because see, Satan doesn't want us to do that. He's trying to make us feel awful. And so we are ashamed and we want to keep that to ourselves. But when we bring it into the light, two things happen. Number one, it frees us. I realize there's still lots of work to do, but it is very freeing to do that. But number two, I can't tell you how many times in the Grow Your Faith community we've had this when the women, and it's interesting because we've had the membership now for a year, and it's especially this month at the time of recording, we are actually talking about strongholds. Isn't that funny? God just amazes me. But spiritual warfare, spiritual warfare and strongholds. And I've seen this community of women come together even more, and everybody is getting beat down this month. And I will tell you, my community manager said to me as we were getting ready to do it, she said, Tammy, you realize we're gonna Satan's going to be coming for us. And I'm like, I know. I just, you never want to do that. But to see how these women have come around here and then have come together around surrounding each other and, all of us doing that, but also being vulnerable enough to say, you know what, this is what's really happening. Because when that happens, that you're allowing others to see that, oh, I'm feeling that too. I'm experiencing that too. And now you've just changed somebody else's life. Right. That's huge. So, okay. So number 2 is the brain dump, but then number 3 is the reflect. And you can get all of the questions. Mandy goes into it in detail in the previous episode for sure. So I'll make sure to link that. But yeah, anything else, any other advice that you have, Mandy? Anything you want to just let them know or make sure?
Yeah, I do want to mention, I think that this is a great step. I think everyone's experience and level of shame, of course, it's individual, right? It's all varying. So I would encourage anyone that is not, that is finding themselves struggling to work through this themselves. You just spoke about vulnerability. To reach out for support in that. That can be counseling, that can be coaching. I know that you do that, Tammy. It's the reason why with my clients it's a program that's a specific length of time. Because it has to be, like you said, a consistent process. So there are people that may need that guidance as they are working through this, right? So they need a little bit more of that one-on-one. So I would highly encourage that for bigger, more traumatic, things. There are other modalities that counselors can use. And I've worked with some incredible Christian counselors that are so phenomenal at integrating their faith with very helpful therapies. So I would just encourage that. I think, like I said, everyone's at a different place with this. But I think it's so powerful. If you need to have that extra guidance and that extra support, to find it where you can, because it is the vulnerability that is going to move you towards that healing and towards that growth. Just as you were just saying, Tammy, holding that, keeping that in, is not, again, just on the physical side. The emotionals, we talked about this at length already, but all of the consequences of that are big consequences. So
for sure.
Just a note of encouragement to, I think that there are things that we can do proactively that we talked about. But if you need that extra step and that extra guidance and support, then don't hesitate to reach out to someone to help you with that.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I see a Christian counselor now. I don't know how long I've been seeing him. I don't know, almost a year or so, but huge strides huge
Right.
strides because of it. And what I've found, I think so often, I always explain it as I feel like it's like we're in the weeds and they're up so tall that we can't see any light around at all. But as we start taking that step, it is painful, it is hard, it feels impossible, but you start taking that step and it's almost like you're kind of going up a hill in a field. So the weeds are the same height, right?
Right.
But as you're coming up and you're starting to walk up that hill, all of a sudden you're starting to see some of that light, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've gotten to the point now. I couldn't have done this a year ago, or well, probably a year and a half ago, but I've gotten to the point where now, even when it hurts, even when it's humbling, even when it's, even when it just is so painful, I know that I'm growing. I've seen where I've come from. I know I have a ways to go up here, but I don't want to stay here and I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to go back. So
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten to the point where I can say, sometimes with trepidation, but all right, Lord, bring it on.
Mm-hmm.
Teach me. Like when it starts coming down on me, I'm like, teach me, Lord. Teach me, Lord. That is always my prayer, or what I say when I'm really down in the muck of it is I stop for a moment and then just like, all right, Lord, teach me. Bring it on.
Right.
Show me,
Yeah.
reveal to me, because I know I want to do better. I want to be better and I don't want to live like this anymore. And I certainly don't want to go back. And I
Right.
don't want to stay here. I want to be
Right.
out there in the light. So yeah. So I'm so glad you said that and I appreciate it. But hey, so listen, tell us, how can we because there are some women listening right now that are thinking, I've got to work with Mandy. I am really stuck. I know that I'm going to need some help. How can my listeners find you?
Yeah, so my website is mandymilescoaching.com.
Mm-hmm.
You can contact me there. It's the same handle on Instagram if you want to send me a message there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've got a podcast coming out.
Yay!
So I'll be going into all this.
Yes.
If you want like the, detailed versions of some of this.
Yeah.
So I've got that coming out next week.
That's so awesome. So by the time this airs on Friday, because what day will yours go out?
Looking at Wednesday. Wednesday is
Okay.
the plan. So
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So
for all the technology that I
yeah, I totally get that. Technology sometimes can be so
right.
frustrating, but yeah, I will put all of this in my show notes. So my listeners, I got you listeners, you can get everything in there, but yeah, 100% listen to Mandy's podcast, head to her website, follow her on Instagram, because this girl, I just know there are women listening who are like, you know what, I've got to work with Mandy because I want to break this stronghold. And so I just, yeah. And my friend, I can't thank you enough. Gosh,
Thank you, Tammy.
just to call you I don't know, several weeks ago, I can't remember how long ago it was. As I told you, I woke up in the morning and had this DM message. And when I got off my call with her, I just felt, and it wasn't about me, but I've never felt that way before.
That's your heart, Tammy. You just want to be
I do.
Yeah.
And it just broke me because I just had nothing for her. And as I was telling Mandy and stuff, I started praying about it, and Lord, what can I do? And how can I help her? And he brought Mandy's name, and I'm like, oh yeah, duh. You're like, hey Tam, you've got Mandy here. So as I said, this is above my pay grade, but I knew you'd be able to help us. So my friend, thank you so much again for coming on. I appreciate you. I love you so much. And yeah, cannot wait to hear your podcast, friend.
Thank you, Tammy. I love being here and I love your community. So I'm always up for the conversation. You know that.
I appreciate that. All right, girl.
Thank you.
I told you it was a great episode, wasn't it? Mandy knows her stuff, and she's just so good at helping you pull things out and break things down. And I loved everything that she was teaching us in this episode. So listen, I promised you a freebie just to give you kind of a cheat sheet about what to do in this situation, or, about breaking the stronghold of shame. And so I created that freebie. So just go over to footprintsofinspiration.com/shame. That's footprintsofinspiration.com/shame and download that free cheat sheet for you. So that's a tongue twister, my friend. So listen, I hope this blessed you today. I would love it if you would share this episode with a friend, because there are so many people out there. Like I said, I get so many emails, and it seems like they're coming more and more. And by the way, keep them coming. I love hearing from you. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to give me a big thumbs up. And wherever you are listening, be sure to subscribe to the show so you do not miss a single episode. And again, hop on over and grab that freebie, footprintsofinspiration.com/shame, and you can download that free cheat sheet to help you walk through this, my friend. And then listen, I will see you back here next week for another episode of a Faithful God podcast.